I'd like to call this council and committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call, please.
All members of council are present, your worship, with the exception of Councillor McDermott.
Thank you. There are a couple of addenda this evening. The first one relates to a shuffling of the order of reports under the Planning and Development Services portion of the meeting. We'll be dealing with the short-term rentals roundtable information report first, and then we'll deal with the short-term rental options report thereafter. Second addendum relates to the ownership of the property at 275 Gorham Road. It's now owned by a numbered company. The principal is Gil Scollier. A few brief announcements. Wanted to make mention of the fact that there are some public meetings with respect to the future of specialized transit in Niagara coming up next week. Tuesday, April the 23rd at the Civic Square in the community room at 60 East Main Street, Welland. That's April the 23rd from 5 to 7 p.m. And then the following day, April the 24th, from 5 to 7 p.m. at the St. Catharines Public Library. It's an opportunity for people interested in the future of specialized transit to have their say and provide some comments and suggestions and ideas to the people responsible for specialized transit in Niagara. Second thing I wanted to mention was that the Chamber of Commerce is holding its annual general meeting this Thursday, April the 18th at the Buffalo Canoe Club. I think tickets are still available if anyone wishes to contact the Chamber of Commerce. And finally, I wanted to reiterate that next Tuesday, April the 23rd, is the final day for people to make submissions to the provincial government with respect to the provincial review of regional government. You can go to the province's website and make your submission. I would encourage any of you who are interested in the future of Fort Erie and Niagara to take the time to inform the provincial government of your thoughts. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. In respect to item number 8.2 and item numbers IS-10-2019 and IS-12-2019, as my business works with Circle P Paving.
Okay, any others? Madam Clerk, I have the same pecuniary interests. I have a son-in-law who works for Circle P Paving, so I'm going to not participate in the discussion or debate or vote on either of those reports. If there are no others, there are no notices of upcoming public meetings. However, we have a public meeting this evening, and that is with respect to the property rezoning of the old Jetmar subdivision in Crystal Beach, Mars Homes. So this is a public meeting. It will start with a member of staff, Matt Kernahan, providing council with some background information relative to the proposal. And then I will ask the proponent to address council if he or she wishes. My mic's on. Yeah, you can't hear me? Why don't you sit closer? Or I could speak louder. Okay. It's, you know, Councillor Luberts, it will probably be very rare when I will ask you to speak louder. Thank you for bringing that to my attention in case people can't hear me. After Mr. Kernahan has provided council with information, I'll ask the proponent if he or she has any comments that they would like to address to council. And then I will ask if there's anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the application or if there's anyone who then wishes to speak in opposition to the application. So Mr. Kernahan, good evening.
Relates to an application for a zoning bylaw amendment that was submitted by Stephen Fraser of AJ Clark and Associates, who is the agent for Dane Gabriel of Mars Homes, Crystal Beach Incorporated, who are the owners of Jetmar subdivision located at the southeast corner of Schooley Road and Michener Road. The Jetmar subdivision was originally registered in February of 1978. The registered subdivision plan contains 54 lots. Over the years, a number of these lots were sold off and developed as single detached dwellings that front onto Rebstock Road, and a number were also added to the rear yards of these existing dwellings. The purpose of this application is to facilitate the development of the portion of the subdivision which remains owned by Mars Homes, which includes lots 1 to 35 and 38 to 44 inclusive of the original draft or the original registered plan, and it will be developed as 54 lots for single detached dwelling. The rezoning is required to permit the reconfiguration of lots within the approved subdivision and to incorporate site-specific regulations to accommodate the proposed dwelling designs. The application proposes to change the zoning from a number of site-specific R2A zones and an R2 zone to a site-specific R2 zone for one proposed lot with frontage on Schooley Road and to a site-specific R2A zone for the balance of the lots. Notification of this public meeting was provided in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act by placing an ad in the March 21st edition of the Fort Erie Post newspaper. In addition, property owners within 120 meters were mailed notice of the application on March 25th. This is an aerial photograph of the subject property as well as the surrounding neighborhood area. Subject lands are located in the Crystal Beach neighborhood, the southeast corner of Michener Road and Schooley Road. This slide shows the site and surrounding land uses. Surrounding land uses to the north are single detached dwellings and agricultural lands. To the south are single detached dwellings which front onto Rebstock Road. To the east are single detached dwellings fronting onto Elmwood Avenue, and to the west is Schooley Road and an agricultural field. This slide shows the proposed site plan for the subject property. The subdivision includes 54 lots for single detached dwellings. 53 of these lots will front onto an internal public road or internal public roads that will be built to municipal standards by the developer as part of the development of this application. There will be one lot for a single detached dwelling that will front onto Schooley Road. Stormwater will be collected in catch basins within the road and rear yards and will be stored in oversized pipes under the proposed road before being discharged into a storm sewer that will be extended up Schooley Road. This slide shows the proposed tree planting and preservation plan for the subject property. This plan was completed in consultation with the town's Environmental Advisory Committee in support of the applicant's request to remove the environmental conservation overlay. The plan shows the planting of a total of 95 street trees in boulevards in the front yards, as well as the side yards of corner lots fronting onto Schooley Road. In addition, the plan includes the planting of 54 shrubs and a mixture of grasses and flowers along the Michener Road allowance. Town's Environmental Advisory Committee reviewed the plan at their April 10th, 2019 meeting, and they passed the following resolution. EAC approves the plan as submitted and is supportive of the removal of the environmental conservation overlay from the entirety of the property. EAC appreciates the care that was taken by the consultant in selecting a wide variety of native plant, shrub, and seed species. This slide shows the natural heritage features on and in the vicinity of the subject property as identified in Schedule C of the official plan. The official plan identifies an environmental corridor in the area of Michener Road. This corridor is proposed to be enhanced through the implementation of the tree planting plan. The official plan designates the subject lands as urban residential and environmental conservation. The official plan designations permit the proposed single detached dwellings and zoning bylaw amendment. In this case, the Environmental Advisory Committee was consulted and scoped the required study to address the environmental conservation layer to a tree planting and preservation plan. As I mentioned, the committee has reviewed the plan and recommend the EC overlay be removed from the entirety of the development. The lands are currently zoned site-specific residential 2A, including R2A-182, R2A-186, and R2A-187, as well as residential 2 R2 zone with an environmental conservation overlay. The current site-specific zoning permits single detached dwellings with a number of site-specific regulations that permit smaller lot frontages and sizes, as well as reduced setbacks. This slide shows the proposed zoning of the subject property. The proposed zoning will remove the EC overlay and change one proposed lot that fronts onto Schooley Road to a site-specific R2 zone. The balance of the subdivision is proposed to change to a site-specific R2A zone. This is a picture of the subject property looking northeast from Schooley Road. And this is a picture looking southeast from Michener Road. Purpose of this public meeting is to obtain the opinion and views of the area residents. A future recommendation will be brought forward to council and committee at a future date. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kernahan. Do any members of council have any questions? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Reddick, too, Mr. Kernahan. I noticed that in the report, and it's coming, we're looking at it tonight for a recommendation, that you have the front lot line, from 3.0 meters to the front lot line to 0.5 meters to the front lot line. How many inches is that? From the front porch?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's about 2 feet.
Okay, so about 24 inches. So in front of these homes where the porch can be within 2 feet of the lot line, is there something between the front porch and the sidewalk other than 24 inches? I guess I'm asking, is there a sidewalk? Is there a road, like does the town own like 6 meters before you hit the road? Like, how far would it be if I was sitting on my front porch to where the road would be, regardless of who owns it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have that exact answer at this time, but there is more to it than just the than the property owner's property to the actual pavement. There's additional area in addition to that 2 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Any other councillors? So Mr. Kernahan, just staying on that point, why is that a change that you support? Your staff, you support this?
Generally speaking, locating houses as close as possible to the street is considered good urban design, provided the garage maintains enough setback to provide for an adequately sized parking space, and that's what's being proposed here.
So if that's the case, why would we have a 3-meter setback provided for in this particular zoning, and the developer is requesting significantly reduced setback?
Well, that is a generalized provision that we have in our general provisions, which applies to all areas, residential areas within the town. So it's a little bit more generally because it applies to established neighborhoods as well. In this instance, this, with the exception of one lot, would all be an entirely newly developed subdivision. So you could have a more uniform setback, which is closer to the street, which in our view is good urban design.
So if this was an infill situation, we would be sticking with the setback set forth in the zoning file?
That's the general provision that we apply in the infill situations is 3 meters, yeah.
And this then reduces the size of the front yard?
That's correct.
Okay. And on a similar vein, there's also a request for a reduction in the setback, I think, for rear yards, porches. Or are they increasing it?
They're reducing it to 2.5 meters from 3.
From 3. And
from a maximum of 3, I should say.
Advisable to be close to your back lot line as well?
Again, in this instance, a large number of the lots are within the what would be a newly developed subdivision. The lots on the exterior are generally backing onto very deep lots that are external to the subdivision. So in this case, we don't think there's a negative impact from that.
And would we know, and this may be a question I should ask the developer if the developer speaks, do we know the approximate size of the houses that are going to be constructed in this subdivision?
That is a better question for the developer. I've seen some concept plans as part of the neighborhood information meeting, but I don't have information on the exact footprints or the housing sizes.
Right, so without knowing that, it's difficult to ascertain whether larger footprint for a house on the lot has any impact or relevance to affordability or not, I suppose.
Yeah, that's, again, Mr. Mayor, that's a better question for the developer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Kernahan. Are there any other questions, Councillor Luberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Reddick. Matt, thanks for your presentation, but maybe you can remind me, did we not go over the setbacks for new subdivisions a few months back and change them so that their setbacks were closer to the road? I'm just going back to my memory. Something tells me that we discussed this before, just for new subdivisions, that we would change the setbacks or have less setback. You remember that?
In a general way, is that your question? Did we change them across the board?
Yeah, I think it was a discussion here at council.
A number of years ago, we made some changes to a number of our zones to help.
I think it was within the last year.
I don't recall that. Perhaps on a site-specific basis, in response to a development application, but my recollection is it was circa 2015 that was last done in a general way.
That was in behind Patterson Chrysler in that neighborhood back in there.
Sorry?
That neighborhood back in behind Patterson Chrysler, back in that neck of the woods of town. And I think that we discussed about having different for new subdivisions, and we discussed the setbacks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I know we did a zoning amendment for the Peace Bridge subdivision, which is in approximately that area. That wasn't my file. I don't know the details.
This is just a public meeting, so maybe you can look into that.
Sure.
I'm pretty sure I remember talking about that.
You might be referring to the exercise that we went through to develop some uniformity with respect to the new zonings that we have. That was done maybe 3 years ago.
That's my recollection.
Yeah, let's look at that, because for some reason I thought that we agreed that we would have less setback on new subdivisions. Okay, thanks. That's all.
Mr. Kernaghan, before you go, looking at the slide that you've got up on the screen, along Michener Road, immediately south of Michener Road, there's a strip of land. That is is that an area that's going to be naturalized?
Yes, that's the area.
And that's off of the road allowance. That's on the property owned by the developer.
That's within the road allowance.
Okay. So, what if Kitchener Road needs to be expanded or widened at some point in time in the future? There goes the corridor.
Kira's looking at me on this one.
Through you, thank you. The Michener Road allowance, we haven't got comments yet from the development coordinator, but normally he'll identify if a road widening is required. So prior to bringing back a recommendation, we'll know if a road widening is required on Michener. I haven't yet looked at the official plan for the size of the width required for Michener. It may already be adequate. Should there be an issue, obviously that landscaping would have to move onto the rear lots.
Well, it looks like it's about a 10-foot strip. Has that been defined in terms of width?
I recognize. Oops. I recognize it's being shown on there. I did receive development coordinator comments subsequent to this report being prepared, and he didn't identify that as a requirement, but I'll certainly look into that further.
Go to the next slide. That one there. So all of the plantings that are shown there are on the road allowance, the existing road allowance.
That's correct.
Is there any reason why we wouldn't require those plantings that accommodate the corridor to be located on the development lands?
Typically, putting them in the boulevard provides us with a level of control for their maintenance to ensure that they're not destroyed by the private property owner.
And do you know the width of the road allowance in that location?
I do not.
Okay, perhaps you could obtain that and get that back to us. I have no other questions. Any other members of council have any questions? Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
So we'll go to the developer or the representative of the developer if he wishes to address council. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Your Worship, members of the committee, members of the public, members of staff. My name is Stephen Fraser. I'm a registered professional planner with AJ Clark and Associates. I'm here on behalf of Mars Homes, who are the owner and applicant of this particular rezoning application. Also, by way of introduction, I have two other people here in attendance, actually three other people here in attendance with me tonight. Andrew Smith from our office is a professional civil engineer, can answer any technical questions the committee or the public may have with respect to engineering, stormwater management. I have Phil Smith from Royal LePage, real estate agent, answer marketing type questions for the committee as well. And then lastly, Danny Gabriel, who's a representative here of Mars Homes. So Matt's certainly done a good job with the technical overview, and I will try to maybe be a bit quicker than I anticipated in my presentation. It was heavily laden with technical discussion, and I don't think that's necessarily the impetus for this particular discussion today. Really, why we're here, more than anything, as Matt alluded to, is that this slide represents the current zoning situation on the subject lands. And underlaid within the zoning is the lot fabric that we're proposing within the future amended subdivision by way of removing part lot control and reestablishing the property lines. And it just, visually, one could look at this and say it's just, it's a bit busy. And what we're trying to do is effectively clean up the zoning for the site so that it is uniform and is consistent with the product that Mars Homes likes to construct. But having said that, we've been cognizant of the existing permissions that are on the site within each of these zones. There was a discussion piece about front yard setbacks and rear yard setbacks, and just by way of some clarification, one of the zones, the internal zone that we're looking to amend, the regulation that's being amended is not the setback per se itself to the front yard or the rear yard. It's the encroachment of front porches or rear porches. So I understand that may be a technical distinction, but I think it's one worth raising. In addition to that, I'm a proponent as a professional that you build flexibility within your zoning bylaw. You try to make it as flexible as possible without restricting market demand. So by no means are we trying to expand the size of these homes or build to the fullest of their envelope. We're trying to build in as much flexibility as we can, so we're not before a committee of adjustment on a site-specific basis for minor variances. I think Mr. Kernahan did a good job of going through the policy environment. I don't need to do that again. And again, it's worth noting that by way of background, this is a registered plan of subdivision. So technically, tomorrow, our client could go out and apply for a building permit on any of these existing lots that are within the lands that they currently own. So what we're trying to do is be respectful of certainly the existing built form in the neighborhood. We want to keep it all single detached dwellings. We're quite pleased with the existing road pattern that we have within the registered plan of subdivision. We're not looking to amend that in any way, shape, or form. Again, the intent is just simply to clean up some of the technical aspects of the zoning bylaw and hopefully make a good development for the community. So Mars Homes has a reputation now within this community, especially Crystal Beach neighborhood. They've done, in my opinion, an exemplary job of working with town staff, the community, and building communities and products that I think this area should be very proud of. And I know that's the intention of our client, again, with this particular development, is they want to carry out something that is beholden with Mars Homes' name. So this, being a pretty straightforward file, it's been going on for quite a bit. We initially had a pre-consultation meeting with town staff at the beginning of last year. Part of that process, or the whole of that process, is to identify what we need to provide the town and the region to make our application complete under the Planning Act. We were only required to do 3 plans or reports. Those are before you. We were tasked to provide a concept plan that was consistent with the area and compatible with the neighborhood. We were tasked to provide a tree inventory and preservation plan, and we've done that. And as Mr. Kernahan has alluded to, that's been through the Environmental Advisory Committee and has received a supportive recommendation. And lastly, we were required to prepare a stormwater management plan, which our office completed as well. So we compiled that information, submitted it at the beginning of this year, and we were deemed complete just recently in March. Again, this is more of a summary of what I've said to date. Is again, we're effectively just looking to clean up some of the technical aspects of the zoning bylaw, and we're certainly receptive to hearing what the committee and what members of the public have to say with respect to that request. Lastly, I think Matt's report did a great job of identifying the comments that were raised both from staff as well as the public. And just recently we had our open house meeting with the public. It was very well received in my opinion. And I think majority of those comments that came out of that particular open house, unfortunately my colleague, really related to engineering, stormwater management, grading, and there were some traffic related concerns. But again, I'll rely on Matt's report because we're tight for time in addressing those traffic concerns. So where do we go from here? Providing this particular information report is received and we get a favorable recommendation from council that's approved. As I mentioned at the outset, we need to then apply for a removal of a part lot control bylaw. And it effectively allows us to lift the existing lot lines for a period of 2 to 3 years, depending on what the municipality enforces, and allows us to then place those lot lines in accordance with a reference plan or a survey that would identify the width and the depth of those lots. So that would be our next step. Obviously, there's some technical things that our client has to address with the municipality and the region with respect to servicing, and engineering, and we're excited for that. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions or defer to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fraser. Are there any members of council that have any questions? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Reddick. To Mr. Fraser. Thank you for your presentation. I'm going to be asking you the same question about the 0.5 front porch from the 3 meters to the 0.5 one. And you alluded to one of the reasons you want it in there so that if you need to make a minor variance, you don't have to keep coming back and asking for it. But how many homes would you anticipate that the front porch be 0.5 from the front lot line?
Through the mayor to the committee member, I don't anticipate any at this stage of the game because we're not that far along in the process of designing these homes. I think the best analogy would be what Mars Homes is doing down at South Coast Village, and that they're trying to create, as Mr. Kernahan alluded to, an urban design feel where the garages are not pronounced, they're recessed, and the facade of the dwelling is ultimately what is being viewed from the street or from the public realm. So I can't answer definitively it'll be 5, 10, 15, 0 homes that have a 0.5 meter setback to the porches. But we, again, want to build in the flexibility. If that's something that, this committee wants to see increased, I mean, we're certainly receptive to having those discussions. But again, to be clear, we want that flexibility so we don't have to worry about it from a zoning perspective in the future.
If I can continue, the further question regarding the same issue is, do you know what roads I would imagine you don't know what roads these front porches would face on. And just an explanation for me, if it was Michener Road, which is a fairly busy road, I would be concerned with the front porch setback and the house being so close to the
I
road.
think any of these houses front on Mitchell Road.
So to answer that question, there are no houses fronting onto Michener Road. They're going to all front onto that portion of Clarkson Crescent at the north limit of the site. So those will all be, unfortunately, rear lotted. So there will be no porches encroaching there. So and you can see by the concept plan that we've prepared, there's no lots that are fronting onto Schooley Road either. They're all fronting internally to the subdivision. So it's really going to be a self-contained little subdivision with its own unique urban design elements.
Further question, what do you think the average price of the homes are going to be?
I'm sorry, I can't
Or the average-
answer that. That's out my area of expertise, yeah.
Okay. One further question. I know that in the information we had, we were talking about swales and catch basins, and also with the request for the rear yard setbacks being smaller. How much area would the swale occupy in regards to that the homeowner could not use that property without interfering with the swale itself?
Through the mayor to the committee member, maybe I could defer that to my colleague, the civil engineer. Would that be fair?
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay,
You can come forward.
thank you.
Mr. Mayor, through you to the committee member. Typical rear yard swale is 0.9 meters in width. In the case of rear yards where we are abutting to adjacent development, there will be some additional width required for the rear yard swales in order to help to bridge the grade from adjacent development to the proposed development. So it's likely specifically the lots backing east onto the existing homes, the rear yard swales would be in the neighborhood of 2 meters in width. And that would be required for drainage purposes. In that case, through the approval of the engineering drawings, the locations and designs of those swales would be approved, and any building permit applications would have to be reflective of the approved grading, and therefore building department would have the ability to reject any building applications that showed a unit within the width required for the rear yard swales.
One of the requirements, or not requirements, one of the things you're asking for also is that the minimum rear yard be reduced from 8 meters to 6 meters. Now, if 2 meters are being taken up in that particular area by the swale, that leaves the backyard to be usable, so to speak, by the homeowner to about 4 meters. Is that correct?
That's correct in terms of the math. The grading policies of the town account for a maximum grade of 3 to 1 even within the rear yard swales. So the area is usable to some extent, not to the extent of sheds, pools, things of that nature. You'd be correct on that front.
Thank you.
Any other councillors? Councillor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Just wondering if you can go back to the slide where you were talking about the park lot control, and to give you flexibility with the
Certainly.
the lot lines. Yeah, this is it here. Can you explain a little bit more? I'm a little concerned about lifting the park lot control, and then you reestablish your lot lines, and does that come back to us for approval? That's more my concern is I'm looking at what we're asked to approve here, and now you're asking that we give you the flexibility to change the lot lines, and then that might be a problem even with the neighbors.
Through the mayor to the committee member, that's a very good question. The process is such that if the zoning is approved with minimum frontages, minimum areas, that we'd have to prepare a plan, a survey called a reference plan that would illustrate at the very least those minimum lot areas. So the Planning Act allows you to lift part lot control only when you're in a registered plan of subdivision, which we are, to enable property lines to get reestablished. So that's a legislative permission under the Planning Act. How it works in Fort Erie, I'm not 100% clear on, so I may defer to Kier or Matt, but I can attest that in other municipalities, it is typically a bill item that council approves without any sort of input because there's no public process. So the zoning is the real public process and the tool used to regulate the lot widths. We could not make them any any smaller than what the zoning permits. We would be able to make them bigger should the developer decide to do so in the future. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, and I think one question that was asked of Matt, I think, was what size homes are you planning on building in? You know that?
I was told by the real estate agent anywhere between about 1,200 and 2,000 square feet.
Okay, all right. Okay, thanks.
Any other councillors? So hence the need for greater lot coverage. Smaller lots, bigger houses, need to cover more of the lot with the house.
Again, yes, Mr. Mayor, for flexibility.
Right, and 1,200 may be affordable, 2,000 probably not in the affordable range, I would guess.
I don't know, to be honest.
Okay, that need not be your concern right now. Needs to be our concern.
Absolutely.
Any other councillors? If none, thank you very much, Mr. Fraser.
Thank you.
And I'm now going to go to the public. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in favor of the application for the rezoning? Or anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the application? Is there anyone who would like to ask council any questions or provide any comments? Either way.
A couple, please.
Sure, please come forward, ma'am. We would need your name and address for the record.
Okay, Carol Kadarian, 4122 Rebstock Road. And I said, possibly, you guys can't answer this yet because you said you're not completely sure. Is this development supposed to be a mix of single-story and double-story homes, or are they all planned to be 2 stories?
Why don't you have to address
council.
Sorry. So why don't you address those questions and we'll get the developer back to answer that.
Specifically, I'm concerned is are all the homes being planned, are they planned to be a mix of single and double story? Because they've asked for a variance here from 9 meters to 10.5 meters, which is a fairly extensive height option. The homes, and I will say that the South Coast homes that have already been built are beautiful, but that went in a fairly vacant area where there wasn't a very large percentage of existing homes to begin with. To put that type of development in this particular area of Crystal Beach is going to create a very inconsistent neighborhood. And so I am a little concerned about how that is going to look as the overall appeal of Crystal Beach is our older homes, our older cottages, our straight access to the beach. The way I'm reading the Jetmar subdivision plan, and I am by no means a math expert, an architect, or anything like that, and I'm referring to page 2 of 15 of the Planning and Development Report. The Jetmar subdivision was registered in 1978, contained 54 lots, 47 to 54, et cetera, et cetera. If you read it, it seems of the original 54 lots, 42 of them have been left. The other 12 have been developed for other single residential uses, my home being one of them, which seems to me that we're now trying to fit 54 homes into what was originally 42 lots, which seems to be a very crowded type of arrangement. And even with the variances and the changes that they're asking for, it is fairly apparent that they are trying to take up more house print on a smaller lot size to fit them in there. I made this comment at the open house that was held a few weeks ago. I do not think that necessarily Crystal Beach or Ridgeway at this point in time has the infrastructure to support the influx of new houses that the area is trying to put in. On the opposite side of Rebstock Road, it's already been clear cut. I quite frankly don't know who owns that development or what the plans are for that development. That's been clear cut as well. So you're literally on the other side of the road trying to do the same thing. If you live in the area, you shop in the area, you walk the area, you reside there, we don't have the services or the infrastructure. When the summer residents flood in, you don't want to go to Joe's Value Mart. You can't get in the parking lot. There's nothing there to shop. And I can't remember who it was made the comment, and I think it's supported in this document here. They said that we believe by building the homes and bringing in the extra people, that will attract more business infrastructure, grocery stores, etc., to Crystal Beach. Well, that may have worked for Kevin Costner and Field of Dreams, but this is not a baseball field we're talking about. We're bringing in people, and extra people who have to live and reside and be able to support themselves in this area. And right now, that's a little inconvenient at best. We've already had major developments go on in Crystal Beach, the Crystal Beach subdivision that's being done by the same developer, where the old boathouse, or the old, amusement park was, the development in Ridgeway behind on the other side of the library. All of those have been done. That brought no extra infrastructure to Crystal Beach or Ridgeway in terms of services to the community. And it seems to me that we're just trying to pile more and more people in there without giving it the adequate resources to do so. I did have a look at the tree structure, and they've done a really nice job in adding and saving some of the existing trees there. But the concern, as was already stated by someone, if you're putting on the existing road allowance, then you're right, there is no room to expand that road. And Michener Road is the scene of multiple accidents. It's a busy road, and should, with the influx of all these new developments, require it to be widened, well, then the planting of those trees was pretty much a waste of time. Well, that's about it for me.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind you, Ms. Guderian, that there's already a plan of subdivision there, so that if the current owner did nothing, he would be able to proceed with the development as it existed.
Absolutely.
Between 1977 and 2019, there have been many changes in the legislation, and now in terms of development, municipalities are required to permit development within the urban boundary at a much denser rate than even 40 years ago. So to some extent, that's why the developer is coming here and looking for this type of development. These lots are typical size, but certainly just wanted to clarify.
No, I do understand it, but I will.
Comments, and I agree with some of the comments.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Before you go, there may be questions that members of council may have. Now you may go.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wishes to address council with respect to this matter? If not, then I'm going to declare this public meeting closed, and staff will take into account comments that have been made by the public and by councilors, and will eventually be coming forth with the recommendation report to council. We'll deal with the information report this evening, and undoubtedly there may be some further questions or comments. So you're invited to stay if you wish. However, that takes us then to Planning and Development Services, and I will hand the chair to Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Planning and Development Services is now open. We're starting off with report PDS-25-2019. Councillor Zanko moves that report. That report is now on the floor. And are there any questions or comments with respect to that report? Seeing none, I'll call the...
I'm good with that. Yep. I'm good. Yep.
Okay, so
that's the roundtable.
We're starting with the roundtable report first, and then we've moved it because there's been a change to the agenda. The other report, PDS 77, will follow after this one. Do you have any questions or comments? No? Seeing none, you would like to try to find it? Okay. Councillor Luberts, you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just looking at when I was going through our package here, having this here recommendation and then looking at what we're going to go to next is the short-term rental options report. I'm not seeing any connection between what the roundtable came up with and an option in the other report, unless I'm missing something here.
No, I think the objective here is to accept the information report and then deal with the next report, and I think we're going to have to take that off the table. Is that correct, Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the counselor. What's happening is council requested that we go to the roundtable. So we did get recommendations from the roundtable, and that included additional items of education, licensing, and enforcement, but they had specific criteria in that. So we are going to bring back a further report to explain exactly what they wanted, because they wanted us to look into a few other matters that we hadn't yet previously looked into in PDS 77. So there's some other matters in that report that we'd still have to get some clarification on and some detail. And so previously you deferred PDS 77, which is the subsequent report. So that's back on the floor for your consideration. And I'll leave that with your decision on what you do with that. But generally the short-term rental roundtable, you will get a further report with those options identified by the roundtable in the coming months.
Thank you, Ms. Dolch. So I think what the best course of action is to deal with the information report, vote on that, and then just get rid of the next report until
And defer the PDS 77?
Defeat it completely, because they're going to be bringing back the report that will deal with the roundtable.
Oh, all right, okay, yeah.
Okay.
All right. I can go with that, yeah, because I didn't see anything in the other report that I really cared for.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, any other further comments or questions by anybody? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That report carries. And that moves us then to PDS 77-2018. And if I can have a mover for that report. Thank you, Councillor Dubineau.
Already on the floor.
Oh, it's already on the floor. It is automatically?
Yeah, because it was first passed, I don't know,
Right, it was deferred.
last year, yeah.
Still learning. Okay, so that report is on the floor. Are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of this report? All those opposed? Okay, that report is defeated. And that takes us then to report number...
So just on a point of order.
Sure.
Madam Chair. So at this point, are we able to move something else with respect to the content of this report? So we should ask the clerk.
Madam Clerk?
Or how do we proceed further to deal with short-term rentals?
I'm wondering if
My understanding is that another report is coming forward
Yeah,
because you
a
have
further
approved the
report.
first one in principle and directed staff to bring forward a further report.
All right, so, and I guess we should have been making some comment on the previous report, because staff is going to think that we're all hunky-dory with those three recommendations, and I think staff may need some other direction. However, I can raise that when we get to inquiries.
That's a good strategy. So that moves us on to the report PDS 24-2019 with respect to proposed zoning bylaw amendment Jetmar subdivision, and that is be received for information purposes as well. Your Worship, thank you for moving that report. That report is now on the floor. Any comments or questions? Councillor Noyce?
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I do have some concerns in regards to all the requirements or the requests for, smaller setbacks, smaller rear yards. I understand that the part of it is that you can get more homes, bigger homes on the same piece of land, and perhaps more homes altogether. But I am concerned. I know that they've done a lot of this in Stevensville for the new subdivision there. I know there's I mean, the homeowners look at it and they, you know, that they see a plan on a piece of paper and then they buy it and then they move into it and they realize they really have next to no front yard and next to no backyard. And then they don't really realize when they, even though it's on their deed, that they have a swale in their backyard. I know a few of my neighbors that have existed, like have been there forever, have had to actually go on to knock on the doors on the people who now abut them, like their backyards, abut their backyards and say, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. They were putting sheds on it, they were putting gardens in the swales and things like that. So I am concerned about making the backyard so small and the front yard so so close to the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. Ms. Stoltz, did you want to comment on that?
Through you to the councillor. And obviously we're here to hear concerns of the council this evening, but generally when we look at the front yards, we do like to bring them as close as we can to the street. It does provide the eyes on the street that we look for in good urban design, and it provides just a friendlier neighborhood because you do see your neighbors on the porch. You have to acknowledge them. It does create a different environment. And we do like to encourage that, so it's a little more pedestrian friendly and things like that. In terms of the rear yards, with the swale, and we did hear from the engineering expert this evening that the swales can be up to 2 meters. We can work back with the agent on this and see if there's specific areas where they're actually looking, because I think it will vary, and there may be areas where they again, we'll have more site-specific bylaws that'll be proposed. So right now, it's a standard bylaw for just the whole area except for one lot. So we'd get more site-specific in specific locations because some would propose a rear yard porch setback of what they're requesting, and others we can increase depending on the area on the plan. Because some of the lots are rather large and deep, so they may not apply to that setback anyway, and we can kind of tailor it a little more if that's helpful to council. But in the end, right now, they're just asking for a uniform zone just for flexibility.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Lubbertson, then your worship.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, I didn't see any sidewalks, and I know on Rebstock there are sidewalks up to Elmwood, I think, if I remember correctly. There are some sidewalks moving around in that neighborhood. And are we going to have any sidewalks here?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the councillor, our requirement is one side of the street must have sidewalks in all subdivisions, so one side of the new streets will have sidewalks. In terms of the connections, we can provide you with an overall sidewalk plan for the neighborhood in our recommendation report, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be good, but I think what I'm looking at is sidewalks on Rebstock and Schooley. I understand the sidewalks within the subdivision. But what about on Schooley Road and on Rebstock Road?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the councillor, I haven't yet seen the comments from our development coordinator who comments on engineering matters and in terms of road upgrades. In this case, is Schooley Road going to be upgraded to an urban cross section with sidewalks? I haven't yet seen those comments. I'm not sure if Mr. Kernahan has those comments readily available, but they weren't included yet in the report. If not, we can report back at the recommendation report stage on that, the sidewalk connections.
Yeah, because, you know, I mean, we're at different meetings, we're always talking about walkable and bikeable communities. And this here subdivision here is right on the end of the road for Bay Beach. And I'm sure that, you know, these people would probably prefer to walk down to the beach than to drive, or if they could use a bicycle or something. But I think that at least on Schooley, that we would see sidewalks extended from where there are. I'm pretty sure there's a sidewalk that goes all the way up to, right to Rebstock Road on Schooley, on the west side. And so I'd like to see something like that added as well. And I just want to make a comment, Madam Chair, about Environmental Advisory Committee. We had, I think, Matt, if I'm correct, we had like 3 site visits, 4? 3 site visits here. And so each time EAC made the recommendation, the developer, he listened to what EAC had to say, even though he really didn't have to. This plan of subdivision has been approved, right? And actually, I think Matt explained it to us at our last meeting that draft plan approval wasn't required by the developer, but because of the age of the subdivision, they decided that they would go with today's standards. And so they allowed EAC to make their comments. I mean, they weren't obligated to do anything. And then with the tree plan, the members of EAC, excuse me, the members of EAC, they were impressed by the fact that the developer took the time to look at what are native plants and native trees to the area, and they put a wide variety of trees in there. And I remember I heard some comments from members of the EAC, and they said that with the variety of trees and the variety of plants that this developer is going to put in this subdivision, at 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we might be with a better piece of property than we have now. So I just thought I'd make that comment so everybody understood that the developer has gone out of his way to make this work. And but at the same time, I would like to see a sidewalk. Maybe you could take one less tree and add a sidewalk.
Thank you. That's good. Okay, Your Worship.
That's either a very expensive tree or a pretty flimsy sidewalk. But in any event, the report says that Schooley Road, adjacent to the property, is to be reconstructed to the town's standard. And the balance of Schooley Road between Rebstock and Glen Spring is to be reconstructed in 2021. So that's apparently already in the works. I had some questions with respect to this corridor. I have no doubt that it's going to be an attractive area once it's naturalized again. My only concern would be the width of Michener Road. I presume that it's a regulation road allowance, 66 feet. Madam Chair?
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Dolch, will you be able to answer that?
Through you to the mayor, yes, actually I did look it up. So normally we require 66 feet in all instances. We do, in our official plan, we do identify road allowances that require larger widths. In this case, Michener's not identified, so it requires a 20-meter road width, which is 66 feet. They do exceed that, so I don't believe a road widening will be requested in this case. Schooley Road, on the other hand, has been identified at a requirement of 23 meters, and they are shy of that, so I'm positive that the development coordinator will come back with a road widening requirement on both sides of Schooley.
Well, Madam Chair, that gives me partial comfort, but not a lot of comfort, because once the cars leave or get to Schooley Road, they've either got to go someplace or they're coming from someplace, and I'm pretty confident that's going to be Michener Road. So if Schooley needs to be widened, one wonders why Michener wouldn't need to be widened, because I think we can all agree that there are only a number of ways in and out of Crystal Beach. And with the development on Schooley Road here and further south, I would imagine that Schooley Road will be busy. So I think staff needs to take a look at whether Michener Road is going to be adequate. If the current road allowance is adequate for an additional 2 lanes at some point in time in the future on Michener Road, then I'm fine. It's just that I don't think it's particularly prudent for us to be putting in a corridor for wildlife, which is what the tree plantings are all about, only to find out 20 years from now that, well, we need more road. So I would ask staff to take a good look at that. Second point that I had, if I might, Madam Chair, has to do with this porch setback. And I understand what Mr. Kernahan was saying, but I'm trying to visualize in my mind where in Fort Erie we've got the property line 20 inches from the porch on a residential property. There undoubtedly are some. I'm just trying to figure out in my mind where they might be. Maybe an older neighborhood, maybe, not sure which newer neighborhood, because even the, we put a sidewalk on that side of the street. Sidewalk theoretically is going to be very close to the porch. I don't know if that's marketable. I'm presuming that it is, but I don't know that. So I'd be interested in some information from staff of where we've got an actual ½ meter setback for porches. And then the third question that I had, Madam Chair, relates to the stormwater management bond. Is that something that ultimately has to be approved by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, or whatever it's called now?
Ms. Dolch, can you answer that question?
The councillor, there is no pond proposed on this site. They are proposing to store in pipes, but it does still need to be approved, yes.
So the stormwater management system will be approved ultimately by the Ministry of Environment. Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, Your Worship. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Noyce? Thank you.
I do the same thing.
Hold what's your name?
It goes along, and I was going to ask it earlier, and I forgot, that they're talking about super pipes, oversized storm sewer pipes, in brackets, super pipes. Have we used them anywhere in Fort Erie already?
Ms. Dolch, can you answer that, or is that for?
Through you to the councillor, I can't think of any, I know we have, I can't think of a subdivision off the top of my head right now. I don't know if the Director of Infrastructure has any thoughts on that, but we have issued them, I do know that as well. I just can't think of one where an example would be recently that I could give you.
With the understanding that perhaps we have had them, have there been any problems with the runoff and them managing the amount of runoff?
Mr. Walsh?
I think we have two facilities in Fort Erie. We haven't had any issues with them. It's just a different way of controlling the rate of runoff.
Right. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Luberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just to refresh my memory and to help the PD people that are listening, what is a super pipe?
Mr. Walsh, can you answer that question for us, please?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. A super pipe is just an oversized storm pipe. It's sized to control the same amount of water that a pond would do in the same situation, except all the water is stored underground. So it's termed a super pipe in that it's larger than would normally be required to convey the flow. In this case, it's also used for storage.
Oh, didn't we? I think we used them in Thunder Bay, right? The last phase of the Thunder Bay drainage.
Mr. Walsh?
I think me and you talked
No,
about that.
The Associate Director of Planning says Dominion Woods Phase 2.
Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, all right. Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That report carries. So that moves us on to PDS 26-2019, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment 275 Gorham Road. Can I have a mover? Councillor Dubineau. That report is on the floor. Any comments or questions? Councillor Luberts and then Councillor Noyce. And
Yes,
then Councillor Dubineau.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just looking through the report, is this, how much difference is this from what they, their original plans were when they came to council last year?
Ms. Stolch, can you answer that question?
Through you to the counselor, the proposal is the same. The difference, the only difference is that they've done a traffic impact study at the request of council.
They did what?
They did a traffic impact study. That's why it was delayed coming back. They did a full traffic impact study to determine the impact to Gorham Road as well as the Friendship Trail.
Yeah, and just, Madam Clerk, just want to make a comment on, I know earlier this evening, the lady came forward and said, you know, we're bringing all these people into town and we're not providing extra services. And I know that this year, this proposal was something that I talked about with some people in Ridgeway by the Lake over the summer during the campaign. And I said, well, they were complaining, they only have one gas station, they would like two. And so here's an example of these things are happening. And I'm just wondering if somehow we can make the residents a little bit more aware of the fact that our increase in our town, the private sector is coming in and providing extra services.
Ms. Stolch, did you want to comment on that?
Through you to the counselor, I'm not sure there's a way to notify residents of that, but they will see some changes that occur in Ridgeway over time and other places. Obviously, you've seen the introduction of the LCBO trailer on Ridge Road. Obviously, they're testing the market right now to see whether or not a full-time store is needed. So you'll start to see some market testing going on by larger chain groups to see if it's a warranted market here. But again, they do need the population to make sure they can withstand, obviously, our slower winter months.
Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor Butler. There's a question here, or a statement here on about a crosswalk. And I'm just wondering, is that something that's going to be an absolute? Like, has that decision been made, or do we have to get permission from other levels, or?
Mr. Walsh, can you answer that question?
Through you, Madam Chair. Preliminarily, we had budgeted money in this year's operating budget for 2 crosswalks, one at this location, one at Ridge Road, where the Friendship Trail crossed. We had done a traffic study ourselves that determined they were warranted. This further backs up our findings in there. So we will be going ahead with the installation of signalized crosswalks at those 2 locations this year.
Thank you for that, and I do think it's necessary here. And I will say, just today, I was driving down, I can't think of which road I was driving down, and a little old lady didn't even stop at the road. She was walking on the trail with her umbrella and walked right in front of me. And it well, I'm thinking, like, if I was going a little faster or was somewhat distracted, she was putting herself at risk. But she didn't slow down. She didn't look. Luckily, I was watching her, but she definitely wasn't watching the road. Almost as if it's just, she was in another world, I guess. But anyway, I think the crosswalk at these 2 busy roads is definitely needed. Thank you.
Councillor Dubnow.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And my question does relate to the proposed pedestrian crossover as well. I believe in the report they had mentioned that I believe it was a Type B PXO was recommended, which has the lights. Well, they all have the lights mounted at the side, but some of them also have overhead signage as well. And I'm just wondering, with the amount of commercial traffic and the in and out flows, if there was just going to be any consideration and perhaps something more visible just on Gorham Road there, specifically, if that had been considered at all.
Mr. Walsh, can you answer that question?
Yes, our study was done by Parsons Engineering out of Niagara Falls. They're experts in transportation studies. They've determined that at the Gorham Road crossing, just the strobe light is appropriate. The Ridge Road doesn't require the strobe, just signs, but staff are recommending a strobe as well, just so that the motoring public of Fort Erie is cognizant and consistent in what our crossings will look like going forward.
Yep, thank you for that, and I appreciate it. And just through the chair again, I'm just wondering, when do we plan on having these PXOs installed?
Thank you. We were waiting for this study, so now that we've got all our findings confirmed, we'll be moving ahead with that. Hopefully, they're installed this summertime sometime. We do rely on the region to coordinate this work. They are responsible for our traffic signals. So it's at their mercy right now, unfortunately.
You're welcome, Councillor. Any other comments, Your Worship?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at page 6 of the report that's talking about the landscaped area to the north of the property, and I'm looking at page 15, which is the sketch of the property, and looks like it says it's 0.84 meters for the landscaping. That's about 2.5 feet. It doesn't seem like a lot of landscaping for a corridor. I presume that that's in addition to whatever vegetation there is along the south side of the Friendship Trail now.
Ms. Dolch, can you answer that question?
Through you to the mayor, yes, I can. It is in addition to the landscaping that's already, or the vegetation that's already adjacent to the trail, but I can have Mr. Vanderveen bring up a larger scale plan on the screen if you'd like. And it does, the planting strip widths actually taper, so in some instances they actually meet, but at the very smallest point, they do pinch down. And we can show you where if you would like to have a look.
I think I've got that. I mean, unless other councillors want to see it, but I think I understand it's 0.84 close to Gorham, and then it widens as it goes westerly. Is that correct?
Through you to the mayor, that's correct.
Right. And then I wanted to ask a question about the setback. Let me go to this one next. So this plan doesn't, rezoning, doesn't address issues like traffic mitigation. That's something that would come forward at the site plan approval point?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the mayor. No, we did look at the traffic. Obviously, they did the traffic study. There is no mitigation measures required based on the traffic report, so none were incorporated. They did indicate a couple of things to highlight. There would be a poor level of service during the evening and weekend, but they felt that this is acceptable as it's typical for entrances that front onto the urban and arterial collector roads. So generally, they didn't propose any mitigation measures, and they clearly indicate no traffic mitigation measures will be required for either of the developments on Gorham Road that are being proposed.
Right, and in fact, it says that at the bottom of page 7. So, Madam Chair, this is where I take a deep breath and I say, okay, these are experts. They're telling us that there isn't going to be any problem except for the odd time. And then I hearken to my personal experience trying to get onto this road and make a left-hand turn at there's a number of locations here now. This doesn't cause the problem. The new development across the street won't cause the problem. They simply help to exacerbate the problem. And at some point, we're going to have to deal with it. And I believe this road is now owned by the municipality. Is that correct?
Ms. Stolch, can you answer that?
Through you to the mayor, yes, it is.
And so we would own from the bottom of Ridgeway Road all the way up to Highway 3.
Through you to the mayor, we own all the way up to Dominion.
To Dominion. So we can at least get the region to widen their road out to the highway, because the amount of traffic that comes in now into Fort Erie on Stevensville Road and Gorham Road into this area is pretty significant during rush hours. And as you get further and further down the road closer to Crystal Beach, it gets busier. And I can't believe that at some point in the future, we're going to have to do something here to manage the traffic. We're being told we need to manage the pedestrian traffic on the trail, which I believe is absolutely correct. That's because there's the conflict between pedestrians, cyclists, and traffic. This is going to be more traffic. And as we build more and more houses, that's going to be more traffic. So that at some point we're going to deal with this, and we may be prepared to accept the proposition that in the next 5 years, which is what this traffic study talks about, no problem. I don't believe that for a minute. I think there will be a problem. And I think that it's short-sighted for us to not contemplate that and ask for something better than don't worry. The other problem is pedestrians and cyclists on Gorham Road. There are sidewalks on the east side of Gorham, nothing on the west side. But, you know, we're talking about the active transportation master plan. We know that the crosswalks are being recommended for certain areas. And this is an area where there'd be a lot of activity. So my question would be, how do we plan to deal with the interface between pedestrians, cyclists, automobiles on Gorham Road in this vicinity? And again, recognizing that this plan doesn't cause the problem, it just helps to exacerbate the problem, as will the development across the street.
Those are good questions. Ms. Stolch or Mr. Walsh, can you answer that?
Through you to the mayor. So obviously we do have sidewalks on one side of the road along Gorham currently. But in the future, we are looking at an active transportation master plan to kind of look at the town and how the connections work and the long-term goals of the town in terms of cycling and pedestrians. Obviously, in the past, we've been hard-pressed to do some of the networks we need, so we are looking at that as we move forward.
So as this area gets built up, Madam Chair, you know, I'm thinking that in other areas where we've got a heavy concentration of commercial retail outlets, we do have either a wider road or even some mechanisms for right in and right out. Maybe that's not so easily done here in this particular area, but you know, we can't just say, well, it's too difficult to contemplate how we're going to deal with it and approve these things. So I don't know what staff's plan would be for that. How do we manage this as we keep getting more and more retail outlets that are going to accommodate or require more traffic, and we're responsible for making sure that it's all safe?
That's the question. Is there an answer?
Through you to the mayor. Right now, we can only go with the evidence we have or the information we have from the expert. I'm not a traffic expert, so I can't speak too much more on traffic other than to say they've indicated no impact in the 5-year horizon. As more and more developments are introduced along Gorham, that may change long term. But at this point in time, there is, as they've indicated, no impact. The concern from staff at one point was just queuing, but we've looked at the queuing on the site, and it will occur on their site. They have, the drive-through lane is, a normal requirement for us is 10 cars, which is along Garrison Road right now and all the others, and we don't see a stacking problem going onto the road in any instance. They're proposing 12, plus they have additional within their parking lot area, so I don't foresee any queuing issues. Turning left, as they've indicated, will be poor level service turning left on weekends and evenings. But they do have a dedicated left turn lane on their site. So it should, you know, again, only stacking for maybe 3 cars, but it should help alleviate any queuing that'll occur on their site. But most of the impact would occur on their site if anything occurred like that.
You know, Madam Chair, the other thing is, and I don't think the traffic study took it into account. I did look at the traffic study. I can't say that I read through every page, but I'm wondering whether they took into account the proposed commercial retail development on the west end of Dominion Road by the ambulance station, which has been approved. Well, I guess what stage of approval they're at, but we know that there's a potential for some type of development there. So did the traffic study take that into account, any potential for that?
Ms. Dolch, would you happen to know the answer to that question?
Through you to the mayor, I'll answer as best I can, but I will refer to Mr. Van der Veen, who did review the traffic study in great detail. So, but generally what happens in a traffic study, they look at the traffic counts of the day, as well as future predicted traffic counts. So they kind of predict what's happening. In terms of whether or not they considered proposed development in the area, I don't know if Mr. Van der Veen can answer that in a little more detail or not.
Mr. Van der Veen, can you come to the podium and answer that question for us, please?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's my understanding from review of the traffic study that it focused on the traffic at the Disher Street, Gorham Road intersection, as well as both sites. So that would be 275 Gorham Road and 262 Gorham Road, as well as the pedestrian crossing at the Friendship Trail. But I believe that was the extent. It did not extend into potential commercial development further north of the Friendship Trail.
If I might, Madam Chair, would it have addressed the residential developments that are taking place in Crystal Beach in terms of traffic? So an increased flow of traffic.
On a basic level, they had some measures in there in regard to background traffic levels, and they both factored that in, as well as the increased traffic that will result from both developments.
But not the residential developments?
Well, I think they were looking at sort of everything, and they had projection measures on general increases in traffic, so that would include increases in population.
I'm very uncomfortable, Madam Chair. Well, I'm going to wait and see if there's anybody else that has questions. I think Councillor Lewis had his hand up.
Okay, does anybody, first of all, I'd like to get first attempt here. Do you have any comments or questions, Councillor? No? Okay. So Councillor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on the mayor's concerns, the traffic problem, I know through my own experience. I worked on that road for over 20 years. And for 20 years, when I went to go home, I never turned left. I made sure that even if I had to make a left-hand turn, forget it. I went around the block, got to a stop light so that I could turn left. That's been going on for me for 20 years. So, yes, you know, we have a development here, right? And they did a traffic study, but his traffic study was based on today's conditions. We haven't done anything about it for 20 years. I know previous to that, I worked for my brother and we came off of Highland. It was only a couple of years before we started going around, so that we only had to make right-hand turns. So I'm just wondering, can't we give the staff direction to take a look at this and maybe consider putting in some traffic signals on Dominion Road? I don't know that we have to blame it on any one development and rely on them for a traffic study. Let's do our own, because I agree with the mayor. There's a problem there. I think that we should address it regardless of whether this guy's going to build or not.
Thank you, Councillor Luberts. Ms. Dolch, would you like to comment on that and weigh in?
Sure, thank you. Through you to the councillor. Obviously, it's council's prerogative to request whatever they feel is necessary. Obviously, from an expert's perspective, we do have the opinion of the traffic consultant saying there obviously is no warrant for signalization or turning lanes nor anything like that. So you do have to be cautious. Obviously, it could be appealed by the developer. But should council wish to do so, we can have further discussions with the developer, but I'd need to know exactly what kind of controls you were looking for on Gorham Road, only because there is no recommendation by the traffic consultants.
I can just interject for a minute. There is the other development across the street that's happening, and they're conducting a traffic study. Is there some synergies there that we can one? So. Councillor, do you have any other questions? No? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor. Along the same vein in regards to the traffic, I'm just reading the summary here, but does it tell us when this traffic study was done? I don't see it in the report that we have. Like, I think it's different if it was done in October, if it was done in July.
I can clarify that for you. Through the chair of the councillor, page 7 of the report, it clarifies that the traffic counts were conducted in Friday, August 24th, 2018, and Saturday, August 25th, in an effort to get a feel for peak traffic in the highest, in demand season in the summer, to try and gain as much accurate info as possible.
Thank you for that. For further question, and later on in the report, it talks about they're anticipating a 12% increase up to 2024, and that's what they're basing their reasoning that they don't need anything to mitigate traffic. That's
through the chair of the councillor. Again, they sort of looked at the intersection and the developments as for background traffic, increases in traffic irregardless of whether or not these developments are there. And then they also did analysis on the impact of these developments in addition to the background traffic increases. And their study concluded that no mitigations were required and that section of road had sufficient capacity for the traffic.
And thank you for that explanation, but again, I'm just saying, under the existing conditions and the 2024 background traffic conditions, a 12% increase to reflect growth in the study area. So that's basically what they're anticipating, a 12% growth in the study area in regards that's going to affect traffic.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. And Councillor Dubino, you'd like to speak as well?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly understand, what Councillor Luberts had said earlier about, no one wants to make a left turn on that road. Especially in the summer, things can get busy. Even going in from Highway 3, things can get a little, hectic there. I think going forward, and I just offer this more as a comment, we had someone up here mentioning earlier about the need for amenities in the community as more people move in. So, a gas station like this would certainly satisfy that. Obviously, there's going to be an increase in traffic on this road. My only concern is I wouldn't want to use this particular request for this property to be used as a means to turn this into something more than it should be. I think going forward, we probably need to look at the road, maybe look at whether, you know, a center turning lane is required. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I'm just, you know, looking at some things that I think might help this. So going forward, maybe, you know, look at the report here, find out what we can do about this specific situation. But I think we have to look at Gorham Road right from beginning to end going forward as our population grows to see what we can do, not only for this particular request here, but other ones in the future that we're going to receive as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, then I will call the Oh, I didn't see your hand. I'm so sorry.
I'm
Just
gonna,
slipped up there afterwards.
so I don't disagree with comments that Councillor Duverneau has said. It's just, I think going forward is now. I think we need to take a look at this. And I support the idea of this rezoning. I don't have an issue with it, and you know, it will be a restaurant, it will be a gas station, there'll be another one across the street, so people will have lots of variety. That's not the issue for me. The issue is, how do we manage the traffic? We're trying to build and perpetuate a livable community. We're creating problems, and we heard lots of people talk about 262 Gorham across the street. So I'm thinking that maybe we should be asking our staff to provide us with a bit more critical analysis with respect to Gorham Road, the future of Gorham Road, and how we're going to integrate what we have with the developments that are taking place, that we know are going to take place over the next year, 2, 3 years. And so I think that they can do that in a month. And I would propose to put this over for a month so that we can get that information. And it may be that staff will come back and say, you guys are really overreacting. I know that's what they're thinking. But, you know, this is something that we're responsible for, the planning of this community. And we are taking advice from our staff. We have very good staff. I don't question the work of our staff in the least. You can sit down, Mr. Vanderveen.
Oh, thanks.
Not meaning to lecture you. And I don't want to question the credibility of professional engineers either with respect to the traffic study. It's just that I've seen traffic studies before, and the results haven't always panned out the way they're projected. So I would like to table this defer it for 1 month, which takes us to, I guess it would be May the 13th, to give staff an opportunity to provide some more critical analysis of where we go from here with respect to Gorham Road in the area between Nye and Erie Road.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. That that has now been asked to be deferred to May 13th. Does anybody have any comments to the timing? Not? Yep, Mr. Walsh, if you'd like to comment, sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Mayor's request for more critical analysis, I was going to suggest that in the 2020 budget we put forth for a comprehensive traffic study from Highway 3 down to the lake. We have requests for more control at Erie Road. Obviously, where this plaza is, we've anecdotally heard traffic stories at Nye. So that doesn't meet the mayor's timeline in this, and I would say that by the time that study is able to get underway, I would think that this development is in place. It's not going to affect immediate traffic, but it will provide sort of a master plan on what we do and when we do it going forward. So I don't think a month delay is going to affect anything in this, and I don't think it'll do any good either.
Your worship.
To the timing. So next Monday, I'll bring a notice of motion that we accelerate the traffic study or whatever that study is from 2020 to 2019, and that if we have to amend the budget for 2019, we do so. I don't know what the amount of money is, but I know that we've got adequate surplus funds from last year that we could pay for that. And I think we need to get onto this sooner rather than later. And then that will give staff 2 weeks to maybe give us some further advice. That was very good advice, Mr. Walsh.
Great. So then, back to the timing of the report. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the timing? That motion is carried. So that brings us now to new business inquiries. Any comments or questions with respect to new business? Not. Going on to business status report. I apologize. Pardon?
The mayor said something earlier about bringing something up under inquiries. Mayor Redekop? Something with the open house or our public meeting. You said you could
Short-term
bring.
rentals. Right,
Yeah.
right. So we're going to be receiving another report, is that correct? With
Yes.
respect to short-term rentals. But I thought one of the things that I'd like staff to consider is whether we need to, I mean, if you look at the top 3 choices that came out of that roundtable, excuse me, they involve licensing. And I had a question with respect to whether we need to license or whether we could simply register. In other words, make all short-term rental accommodations register with the municipality so that we know where they are, and we could then at least put some information on our website, as opposed to licensing, which requires us, I think, to do a bit more in terms of maybe inspecting the property and what have you. Whereas if we simply had them register, it would be less work for us, but then at least we would have a handle on where they are. And so I was just wondering whether staff had considered that, or whether that...
That's a really interesting question. We have considered it during the roundtable, but I'll let Ms. Stolch speak to that.
Through you to the mayor. Yes, we did consider at the roundtable. I did ask the question whether it could be, whether the licensing could be informal or formal. And we explained the parameters around that in terms of formal would mean more licensing restrictions and follow up on that, or it could be informal where it was voluntary, where you just come in and you register your business. Whereas the other version, we'd have to technically hunt down those that didn't get a license and more enforcement and more licensing requirements. And they did indicate that they did not want to go the voluntary approach. But they did make some suggestions I can kind of allude to now that we're looking into, and that's why we weren't able to provide a fulsome report to you. They did ask us to look into perhaps contract positions and also hiring an agency instead to see if the cost could be brought down. So we are kind of looking to see if we can tweak our original kind of recommendations on numbers. To see if we can kind of scope it down a bit more than a full licensing program and kind of reduce the staffing complement that would be needed.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I wasn't thinking of making it voluntary, but I'm not really interested in spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to regulate and manage a situation that has been isolated in its problem areas. But I do think something where we've got a handle on where these locations are would be appropriate. And surely there's got to be a mechanism where we can require those who are operating these types of accommodations to register with the municipality. And I think staff should take a look at that.
That's very interesting comments, and we certainly did discuss that during the roundtable, and we took everything into consideration. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised when the report comes forward. So we'll wait for the report.
I'm looking forward to being pleasantly surprised.
Awesome. Any other comments or inquiries? Seeing none, business status report? No questions, I'll turn the chair back over to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler. And that takes us to infrastructure services, and I'll hand the chair to Councillor Zanko.
I thank you, Your Worship. Infrastructure Services is now in session. We do not have any presentations or delegations this evening. So that brings us to report IS 10-2019, award of tender for the 2019 hot mix asphalt contract. And I'm acknowledging that Your Worship and Councillor Butler have declared conflicts on this report. Can I have a mover? Councillor Dubineau. Are there any questions or comments regarding this report? Councillor Noyes?
First, I want to recognize that there's some residents from Burger Road here, and they have been very patient over the many years waiting for Burger Road to get the much needed attention, and I'm glad to see that it's on here. And I do want to acknowledge all the work that that the prior councillor, I'm losing my mind today. It's been too long. Councillor Nutt has done to bring this to fruition. I know that 10 years ago I was working on Burger Road, and I know that Councillor Nutt concentrated on it greatly to move it forward. So I'm pleased to see it's on here. So I'm all for Burger Road. I do have a concern though, and I do want to ask that Teresa Drive, River Trail Crescent, and River Trail, those three, they're all connected they're in Black Creek, Douglastown, be put in abeyance, I guess is what we're asking. I'm going to be asking for. There's there's a problem with the road. It's not behaving like it should be behaving for a tar and chip first application. I brought this up and had discussed it in great detail with the Director of Infraservices, Mr. Walsh, and I'm sure he can comment on it also, but there is a problem with the road. It's not behaving like it should. I have taken some time today and visited other roads that are on this list for surface treatment just so I could have a comparison, and there really is no comparison. I will mention that Councillor Dubineau said he actually drove on River Trail Crest and he thought it was a gravel road. It's not supposed to be a gravel road, but that's exactly the impression that it leaves you with. There's definitely something that's not quite right with it. And so I know that it needs to be investigated, so I would like those three roads to be just put in abeyance. I understand from Mr. Walsh that he's not going to go forward on them right away, but I would still like to put them aside from this report, and so that we have more information on this particular area. Other than that, I'm in full support of the report. The only other comment I would make that I went to our website, the Town of Fort Erie website. I actually brought copies, but you guys probably don't want copies of it, in regards to the road resurfacing, and it talks about the road resurfacing and definitions of what the town would do. And under surface treatment, under hot mix overlay, it says a new layer of asphalt is placed on top of the existing roads, and in brackets it says urban areas. The second is hot mix mill and overlay. A portion of the existing asphalt road is milled off, and a new layer of asphalt is placed on the milled surface, and in brackets again, urban areas. Then it says surface treatment, aka tar and chip sealing. Asphalt emulsion is sprayed on top of the existing road surface or other base materials and is coated with fine aggregate. And in brackets it says rural areas. But these areas that, some of these particularly, I'm concerned about River Trail, is an urban area, it's not a rural area. So I did bring this to the attention of Mr. Walsh, and I guess he was saying the website is not, that needs to be corrected, and it should be corrected, because according to this, rural areas will be the only areas that are going to be getting tar and chip, and that's actually not the case. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh, did you want to comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Councillor Noyes' words that something is wrong, I think it's a little over-exaggeration. We're not happy with the results right now. We are doing an investigation on Teresa, River Trail Crescent, and River Trail Drive. I'm not sure what Counselor means by abeyance in this, so if I could get more clarification on that, is council, if they're held in abeyance, is council looking for a memo from Infrastructure Services following the investigation? Or, I'm not sure what we're doing here, if the vote were to go that way.
Councillor Noyes, were you looking for a memo on the outcome of that? Or are you looking for more so remedies to fix it?
I think a little bit of both. I think if there is an issue with the road as opposed to calling it a problem, then putting a second application on a first application that's not working correctly, I understand in discussion with Mr. Walsh, is not going to solve the problem, that he can't do it. You know, if there's a problem, there's a problem and has to be fixed. And then therefore that we can look at, you know, what next steps would be. I don't want to just assume that the next step is going to be surface treatment. So I think after we get some more information in regards to what's going on with these roads, we can then either, you know, like decide what we're going to do to mitigate it.
So, Mr. Walsh, after the investigation, I'm assuming that if you provided memo to council, you would be providing overall findings and the solutions on how we remedy this issue. Is that fair?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any further comment? Councillor Noyes?
I'm not sure how we take it on. Like, can we put it in abeyance? So I need to make a motion then that we put those 3 roads in abeyance until we hear back?
Mr. Walsh, this is something that's, from what I'm hearing, you're working on right now.
That's correct, Madam Chair. I don't think a motion is necessary. I'm standing here in front of council, giving you my word that we're not going to do anything, that if we find the road is not performing the way it should, we'll be addressing that before we do anything further.
Okay. Anything further?
I can accept that. I have great confidence in Mr. Walsh, but I don't want it to get lost in all the rest of the roads that it is an issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, is there any timelines on this investigation? Do you have a particular month when you anticipate this should be completed?
Madam Chair, this is on our highest priority. Assuming this report goes through, we do have a contractor waiting on work to do these. So we do have an issue in that the proposed contractor for the second coat is different than the contractor that applied the first coat. So we would like to get it resolved, hopefully within a month, and report back to council through a memo.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on our river trail, I had a conversation with Councillor Noyes last week, and if I remember correctly, there was a gentleman that lived on the road that knew a little bit about road treatment, and he said something about there was something wrong, and that the base wasn't right, and there was mud coming up through the road because there was a poor base. That's what usually is the problem, and that the stone wasn't washed. They put unwashed stone down when they did the surface treatment, so nothing is sticking. And so I don't know if we've come to that conclusion, but I need to know that that's what we're going to be looking at, because if that's the case, then from what I understand, you can't resurface if you have a surface that was done with unwashed stone or improperly, or it's going to end up with the same result as you have now.
Councillors, I think this is probably part of the investigation. Mr. Walsh, if you want to further comment, but what I'm hearing is these are the things that will be looked at. Is that true?
Sorry. No, what you've said is correct.
Councillor Luberts?
So that will be something that will be looked at, and if it, I mean, I have a problem with the fact that this is a problem road, and I don't know. I mean, to do Yeah, I guess you're gonna look at it, but as long as we know that we're not gonna do anything with it until we get the results of what's wrong. And if it needs to be a new base put in there, I think that we should look at having a new base put in as well.
Again, I don't believe it's being looked at. I believe that the process overall is being investigated, and confirmation of a problem, whether it exists or it doesn't, those are all part of the investigation. So
Yes.
I don't think it's just a high level overview. I think infrastructure realizes that there is an issue, and they're going to try to remedy it and find out what the issue is.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, but if I heard Mr. Walsh correctly, he didn't agree with Councillor Noyes that there was a problem, that something was wrong. And if something is wrong, it's wrong. So I don't want to just do a study and do an investigation on the road treatment. I would like them to take a look at the base as well. And I just need some reassurance that the base is going to be looked at.
Mr. Walsh, is the base part of the investigation?
Through you, Madam Chair, we're looking at the entire road from the base to the stone to the emulsion to the treatment methods to the application process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Anything further? Councillor Noyce?
Thank you, Councillor Zanko. Just to update, and Councillor Lupert and I did have a long conversation, and there is a gentleman who was going to be coming forward today, but I only knew he existed on Friday morning, and I missed a deadline for registration at 3 o'clock on Thursday. So we're going to try to register him for next week so he can come. He's also a resident. He lives on the road, and he works in construction, has worked on roads for many, many years, and has some opinions on what the condition is. And I've also tried to put the two of them, Mr. Bath is his name, and Mr. Walsh, trying to get them to connect. And it's just a matter of timing. We just haven't got there yet. And there's another resident too that I'm hoping to him to have a conversation with Mr. Walsh. So there is time. There is a lot of, how to say, like things that we have to work through to find out exactly what happened to the road. But I don't want to minimize, and I want the residents of River Trail and Teresa Drive to really understand that it is a mess. And there is something going on with that road. If you go to that road and then you go to Burley Road, the difference is night and day. And they're both having surface treatment. I know one's an urban, one's a rural, the speed of traffic, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons. But for whatever reason, River Trail Crescent is not behaving like it should. And it has really created a hardship for a lot of the residents that are living there. And I've heard this from, and I'm sure Chris Nutt heard it last summer. I'm not exactly when it was done, but he heard it at the beginning, and I know Mr. Welch, he's had a umpteen calls about it. So I have confidence that it will be investigated, and I'm hoping that the resident that lives there that has some background will be coming forward as a delegate next week to give us his point of view, and not only as someone who works in construction, but also as a resident. So that's where Councillor Lupert's and I had the discussion on.
Thank you. Is there any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That report carries. That brings us to report IS 11, 2019. Award of tender for the 2019 sidewalk repair program. Can I get a mover, Your Worship? That report's on the floor. Any comments or questions?
Just had one question, Madam Chair, and that relates to page 12 of the report. It's a reference to new sidewalk at Driftwood Trail between Sunrise and Butler's Drive. This, I presume that's a section of sidewalk that's being paid for by the developer.
Mr. Walsh?
I don't have that information with me right now. I'll have to get back to the mayor on that.
I'd appreciate that, because I don't know why we would be awarding a contract within a subdivision for a new sidewalk when this is a repair tender for sidewalk repairs. Maybe that's my second question. Why would a new sidewalk be in a tender for sidewalk repairs?
Mr. Walsh, can you comment?
Through you, Madam Chair, if we've assumed the sidewalk, and we can't pinpoint damage from anybody in this neighborhood, it would likely fall to the municipality to effect repairs in order to minimize our liability on this sidewalk.
So it says new sidewalk, doesn't say repair
apologies.
sidewalk. It's 85 meters, which is the longest section of sidewalk in the report. And it's within a subdivision that was constructed fairly recently.
Through you, Madam Chair, Ms. Dolch informs me that there was an error made in that the sidewalk wasn't noted on the original plans of subdivision, and that's why we are installing it now.
Okay. Do we have a contract for the installation of new sidewalks in other parts of the town? In other words, is there another tender that we're putting out in terms of new sidewalks?
Mr. Walsh?
No, this is it.
All right, so this is the logical place where it would be located?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other members? Councillor Butler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to the sidewalks, I know that there was some sidewalks that were destroyed and removed during the building of John Brandt School on the South Mill Street and Highland Road off of Ridge Road. And I just wonder, I don't see anything on there with respect to repairs in the Ridgeway area. There are two areas of concern. I wonder if you could take a look at that one. And also, there is one off of Dominion Road. I'm going to have to get the proper street inference and then send it to you.
Mr. Walsh, did you want to comment regarding the John Brandt?
Yes, I would, Madam Chair. That has been brought to our attention, and we are looking at that through Traffic Coordinating Committee.
Anything further, Councillor Butler? Any other questions? Mr. Walsh, just for clarification regarding this report, this is really only what's projected for this year. I know that there's a number of additional sidewalks, not necessarily requiring repair, but being considered that just wouldn't fall under this year's planning. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Through the planning group, or our planning development services, Chris Miller is undertaking the the active transportation master plan right now. That report will identify key missing links of sidewalk and trail and such, cycling routes, and from then we'll have a capital budget item developed annually for the installation of new sidewalks. This tender only primarily addresses repairs of existing sidewalks. We do an annual inspection to meet our minimum maintenance standards, identify sections of sidewalk that are deficient, and undertake repairs annually.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That report carries. That brings us to IS 12-2019, award of tender for the 2019 asphalt utility cut reinstatement. And Your Worship and Councillor Butler has declared a conflict on this report as well. Can I get a mover? Councillor Noyce, any comments or questions? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That carries. Does any member of council have any new business or inquiries? Councillor Butler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Earlier, one of the residents said that there were a number of accidents on Missioner Road, and I wonder, do we have any stats that would confirm that?
Mr. Walsh?
We can, through Madam Chair, we can query the region. The police are the holder of the accident records right now. There used to be a database that we had access to. Now we have to go through the region to get access to that.
Councillor Butler?
I have one more question, but I'm not sure it falls under this category, but.
You wanna try?
Yeah, I would like to try. So it's been brought to my attention that there was direction about a problematic situation with beaver control and that traps have been set because they're causing havoc on the roadways and in other areas. And I don't know if you're the department that that would be. It is you. So could you talk about that, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, our drainage superintendent, Dave Maiden, has received numerous reports of flooded waterways this spring throughout town. For the past few years, we have been trapping beavers and relocating them as appropriate, and then removing the beaver dams to improve drainage. Typically, the beaver dams are on municipal drainage courses, so that allows us to do that. If they're not, we do consult the NPCA in what we do.
If I may, Madam Chair, just further to that, because the questions that are arising surrounding the beaver relocation is if they're being handled humanely and that they're not being sold to trappers and their pelts being used for nefarious reasons. But could you just clarify that for me, please?
I know they are trapped humanely. They're live traps. I'm not sure where they are relocated to. I believe they're not sold for traps. The trappers we do use are licensed trappers by the Ministry of Natural Resources. So without details, I know everything's on the up and up.
Would you mind, Madam Chair, if I requested then just a follow-up email just to let me know where these beavers are being relocated so that I can give peace of mind to our constituents?
Mr. Walsh?
Yes, I'll get that information from Mr. Maiden.
Thank you very much.
Any other inquiries? Councillor Noyce?
Thank you, Councillor Zanko. Later this afternoon, or earlier this afternoon, we were sent a report from the federal government regarding rail crossing and housing. And I quickly reviewed it, and they were talking about rail crossing safety. I know that's something that I've brought up a few times. And I'm just wondering if when the Director of Infrastructure, who's ever in charge of all this stuff, has a chance to look at it to see if it would help us in getting some more crossing arms, or how it's going to affect the crossings that don't have any arms at this time. But again, it just came up this afternoon. And there also was a large amount of money going towards affordable housing. So it'll be interesting to see how this is going to perhaps help our municipality. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh, would you have received the same email? It's possible you probably haven't read it yet.
No, through you, Madam Chair, I haven't received that email, but we will be looking for it.
Okay. Anything further? Nope. Seeing no other inquiries, does any member of council have any questions regarding the business status report? Seeing none, I will close infrastructure services and hand the chair back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zanko. That takes us to corporate and community services, and I'll hand the chair to Councillor Dubineau.
Thank you, Your Worship. Corporate and Community Services is now in session. We have no presentations or delegations. However, we have reports. We have CIO-09-2019 funding request for modernization and upgrade to the Fort Erie Group family practice. Can we get a mover, Your Worship?
I'll move that.
Do we have any questions, Your Worship?
Yeah, and subject to what other councillors have to say, we did receive a memo from the CAO indicating that he felt there was a need for some additional information before council could adequately deal with this matter. At the corporate services subcommittee meeting earlier today, we also heard from Ms. Ferricioli about some performance measurements that she would contemplate in an agreement. So I think it would be appropriate if we were to at least give staff further opportunity to look into that before we deal with this. So subject to whatever other questions councillors might have, it'd be my intention to move that we defer this for 1 month.
Yeah, that sounds actually like a good idea. So I guess we have the.
Haven't moved that yet in case there are other councillors that want to ask questions.
Does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Noyce?
Thank you, Councillor Dubineau. I think I'm probably along the same lines as Mayor Redikoff in that there is more information that we require. I know sitting on the Accessibility Committee, there's always been a question about the lack of access in the bathrooms and also the pay and display that you can't read, and that the parking lot itself is deteriorating. It doesn't seem to be having any upgrades and someone using a walker or whatever, and also the handicap parking signs. I think the town gave them some, but I don't think any of them are actually put up yet. So I would like to see more information on how this can be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. And any other questions? Okay, so who wants to?
Well, I'll move that we defer this to the May 13th council meeting.
All right, so,
if that's adequate time for staff.
All right, so that's on the floor. Are there any other questions with regard to timing? All right, seeing none, so I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries. All right, so we have another report here, CAO-10-2019, funding request for walk-in mental health clinic for youth in Fort Erie. And Councillor Butler has moved that. Do we have any questions, reports on the floor? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor Dubineau. I think this is just a wonderful thing that's happening. I had a chance to talk to Joanne today and congratulate her. I'm sure she did a lot of work for this. Now, mental health issues, I think we're all familiar, and the youth and what a needed service this is. And for the sum of $20,000, we're going to have someone in our own municipality for 1 day a week to really help this. And I understand, talking with Joanne, that there's going to be a great deal of, like, you don't know what you don't know, so to speak. So they're going to make sure that the population that it's intended for will be informed that this is available to them. And so I'm very happy to see this, and I congratulate Joanne for helping bring this to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. Any other questions or comments? Your Worship?
Yeah, this is an ideal setup, and I had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Bayless and Ms. Ferricioli, I don't know, maybe a month ago. And his idea is to put together adequate data during the period of time that this service is provided over the next year, so that he can garner long-term sustainable funding to continue this perhaps at an expanded level. So it's a good start, and it certainly is a very needed service, and one that has been absent in any formal fashion in Fort Erie for a number of years. So I support this.
Thank you, Your Worship. Any other questions, comments? And just before I call the question, I just want to echo the sentiment expressed by Councillor Noyes and His Worship. This is definitely something that we do need in our community when, I believe the Canadian Mental Health Association says about 1 in 5 Canadians will be affected either by mental illness or some other mental health issue during their life. That affects youth and children as well, just like anyone else. So as a father, I'm very happy to see that this is something coming to our community, and it's something I do support as well. So I'll call the question. All in favor? And it carries. So that moves us on to new business inquiries. Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Dubineau. This is a new business, old business. I asked a while ago for the visa statements for the EDTC, and I understand there was a meeting this past week, and I understand that this was supposed to come up on the agenda, so I'd be interested in knowing, because I haven't heard.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Noyes. I believe Councillor Butler has an answer to that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for raising those questions. Councillor Noyes. So we did get the information. I did not pull it up in front of me, and I should have. So to the best of my knowledge, I'll read, and then I'll send you a follow-up email with respect to it. The very first month that you had inquired about was a hefty sum, but it was with respect to charges for educational purposes for both the assistant at the time and for the other EDO to get certified. And so those were university fees that made that a large sum, or training fees. And let me just see if I can find that, and I'll read it. Just you can just bear with me for a moment, and I will find that information. Pardon me? I can talk to it, and then I can send you some information with respect to it. The second month that you were inquiring about the information, a second here. Yeah, thank you. Just gonna grab it. Okay, so with respect to the visa statements for 2018, there were 2 months in which the EDTC visa statements were higher than normal, April and November, when one was with respect to $6,086.89 was the amount that you were inquiring about, and that was for year one registration for the University of Waterloo's Economic Developers Association of Canada program, plus the travel expenses, airfare and accommodation for those meetings with the Canadian Consulate in Boston and meetings with the Canadian Embassy in Washington, and that's where those expenses came from. And the purpose of the meetings were to provide an introduction on Niagara, the key sectors, advantages for business located here, and the overview of incentives programs to build relationships, intelligence gathering, and generate investment leads for Niagara. And that was part of the Team Niagara initiative. So that's where that breakdown comes from. And then your other inquiry was with respect to November of 2018, where the visa bill was $5,365.22. The expenses that contributed to that bill being higher than normal were related to a table being purchased for the Niagara Economic Summit and a charge in the amount of $2,938 that occurred in error, in which the EDTC was reimbursed in December for that error. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I'm just wondering, is that something that you'll be circulating out to Councillor Noyes or to all councillors? Perfect.
Just to councillors, though.
Excellent. Thank you. There any other new business or inquiries? All right, seeing none. Any questions related to the business status report? Also seeing none, and I guess that's it. We'll hand the chair back over to His Worship.
Very efficient, Councillor Dubino. That was good. Okay, that takes us to scheduling of meetings. Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's actually 2 meetings being held here tomorrow. One meeting being held here tomorrow. FEAT, Fort Erie Active Transportation Committee, is having their monthly meeting here tomorrow at 5:30 in conference room 2, I believe. There is also a library board meeting tomorrow being held at the Fort Erie Library. That's tomorrow at 5:30, which I will not be attending either one of them because we have our strategic planning meeting.
There's 3 meetings.
There's 3 meetings, yeah.
That's, you're not doing very well on your scheduling, Councillor Zanko. Because it seems to me you had a meeting last week when we tried to set this up. Are there any other meetings that anyone wishes to advise us of? Councillor Noyes.
There's a Fort Erie non-for-profit housing meeting this Wednesday at noon.
Where is that?
I think it's going to be at the Bridges.
Okay. Any other meetings? Okay, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Lubert, you look like you're excited about the prospect of finishing up this meeting. That's why you that's why you scare me. Would you like to move that we adjourn? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried.